So recently, we saw the debut of the latest film from Pixar Animation Studios with the release of Elemental. And coming into the film, I was pretty hyped. Look, for me, the past couple of years of Pixar films have been less than impressive. They haven't been truly terrible films or anything like that, but they just didn't grip me. Turning Red, Lightyear, I enjoyed them well enough, but they just didn't hit all those marks that you want from a Pixar film. I think as a whole, we've been conditioned to expect a little bit more from the studio. It's developed so much prestige through the first 3 decades of its existence that it really is tough to accept a film of lesser quality, even though those lesser films might be, well, on par with the higher tier of other animation studios. You come away from these films feeling worse than you would because it was a Pixar film, and because you do expect better. And so for me personally, this felt like a step in the right direction. I thought the trailers for this film were setting up to be a really interesting premise that felt like it was going back to that classic style. It looked good, the plot seemed intriguing, and I was eager to go and see it. And before I give my personal thoughts on it, I figured I'd take a look at how it's doing in terms of its reviews and its box office. And yeah, for box office, it's about as bad as it can get. It had a budget of $200 million, and as of right now, it's grossed $48 million, which is not good. It's well on the way to being a box office bomb, and is in fact the worst opening weekend for any Pixar film ever to have released in cinemas. That bodes pretty ill if you ask me. Suddenly, any chance of a sequel seems like it's getting washed down the drain, but what about the critical response? Well, I took a look at the Rotten Tomatoes scores, and as for the audience score, it has done very well for itself with a 92%. And for me, that was actually quite surprising, as I saw a bunch of statements and posts and whatnot on social media in the lead up to the release that showed that people expected the film to be kind of bad. They didn't think it had that Pixar flair, and that it looked boring and derivative. But now, after the release, it seems the tune's changed, and people seem to rather enjoy the film and think it's quite good. Maybe not one of Pixar's top tier films or anything like that, but also better than some of the films we've seen them put out recently. But that being said, the critical response was perhaps a little bit more muted, with the critical score coming in at 76% as of this video, which was not a terrible score. And indeed, that's the score of a good movie. But it doesn't quite match up with that audience score, and in all honesty, I think the overall Rotten Tomatoes critical summary of the film really sums up my thoughts on that matter. Elemental may not satisfy as fully as the greatest Pixar pictures, but it remains a solid story told with dazzling visual flair. And yeah, that seems about right. It doesn't quite hit that top echelon for me. It's not Toy Story or Finding Nemo, WALL-E, Incredibles, Up, Inside Out, Coco, but it certainly sits in the next tier down. It's not perfect, but it's certainly enjoyable, and honestly, it had all the tools to be in the upper echelon. It just fell a little bit short at times in a couple of ways. In terms of the actual design of the film, I thought it was excellent. Visually appealing with excellent animation and character designs. And I think that's something you just come to expect with Pixar, or even just Disney animation these days. Everything's gonna look good. But for this film, I found it more impressive due to the risk involved. Pixar at least usually has a handful of human characters, or humanoid characters. Here, we're going far more into an out there sort of design. One where the animators need to craft characters that inhabit a world that's highly reminiscent of human society, with characters behaving like they would in a human world, but with no humans or animals, and rather dirt clumps, fire, water, clouds. That's what we're dealing with here. And I think the film does this very well, especially with the water people. Holy shit. Having them all wibbly wobbly with the light glistening through them, the little droplets, the bubbling, the steaming when they get near fire, it's just a visual marvel. And I was honestly a bit surprised before I saw the film to actually see people naysaying these design choices. In terms of both story and design, I saw people complain that it felt like a Zootopia clone, which, well, not really, no. And we'll circle back to the story in a little while, but in terms of design, like, yeah, it's a fantastical city. Imagine that. How unoriginal. It just feels like such a weird complaint that I've seen directly leveled at these visual design choices. Doesn't make sense to me. It looks good and it feels unique. Yeah, it's a city. What of it? Lots of movies use cities. Now, in terms of the music, yeah, it's good. It's not really something I took much notice of outside a couple of scenes, but in those scenes, particularly the romance scenes, I will admit the soundtrack was able to give me the tingles. When they were dancing under the bridge, hell yeah, what a scene! And made complete by the music. And so, in terms of visuals and soundscape, the film's already set up to be a resounding success. A true Pixar classic. And so why is it not? Why is it only a good film and not a great film? And I'd have to say it all comes down to the storyline. The story itself tells the story of Ember Lumen, a young flame elemental living in Element City. A child of immigrants, Ember and her family, and indeed her flame community, have all faced significant discrimination at the hands of the other elements, specifically water elements, since their arrival in the city. The city they live in was not built for them, and so they've had to carve out their own piece of it into Firetown. Days away from her father's retirement from running their local convenience store, Ember meets City Health and Safety Inspector Wade Ripple, who, despite his kindly demeanour, is forced to write up the shop for a number of code violations, which would see it shut down and her family subjected to large fines. And so, Ember goes to try to stop this from happening, and along the way, realises that there's a whole world outside Firetown that she wants the chance to experience. Together, Wade and Ember fix damage to a dam that's supposed to hold runoff from ships that's causing flooding in the city, and continue to bond with one another despite their opposite elements, which in turn results in them falling in love and realising that water and fire can mix, and that in the end, it won't destroy them. Then the story sort of moves to talk about how Ember doesn't want to take over the shop, they have some drama, the fix made to the dam breaks and floods Firetown, Wade sacrifices himself to save Ember and the sacred flame, and then he comes back to life at the end after Ember realizes he's only evaporated into the ceiling and is actually still alive. And so, she makes him cry to make him solid again, and they kiss, and it's all happy, and they go off to live their lives with their family's blessing. Hooray! And yeah, I think the story's where things fall off a little bit. It's not that it's bad, far from it. I really enjoyed that they made a full-on, unapologetic romance. That's the core of the film. Things are rom-com. And I found that really unique, because whilst romance is often a part of Pixar's movies, I don't think it's ever really taken the forefront quite like this. And so, I did enjoy that. And you know, the deeper themes, immigration, racism, xenophobia, prejudice, acceptance, choosing your own path, those broad strokes were well done. And there was a whole lot of emotional depth within the story itself. I just think the major problem is that the movie has too many plot threads, and too many threads that it doesn't address in enough depth. At first, the story seems to clearly be about Ember and Wade falling in love against the odds whilst trying to save her shop and the whole of Firetown from the flood. And to me, at this point, it felt like there was going to be a sabotage subplot and an actual villain of the story, because it looked like the dam was sabotaged on purpose. But then, nothing. They kind of let that story lie till the very end of the film, and then it pivots more heavily into a true love despite cultural difference and disapproving family story. Which, well, okay, that's another storyline that can really encapsulate a whole movie. But now, we've sort of split the film in half. Disaster film, disapproving family romance. But then they pivoted again into a tale about following your dreams and not conforming to what your family wants you to do if you don't want to. And that's a third storyline. Another story that could really be central to the whole film. And despite this massive story trinity, these are all simply pieces of Ember's overarching story. And because the story tries to divide itself amongst all these three competing threads, nothing really does get resolved in a way that feels complete. And so the story does feel a little bit shallow at times, and you come away from the film having enjoyed yourself, but not wowed like you are with so many other Pixar films. And so because of that, despite it being a 10 out of 10 in every other way, the film's wholly unable to hit that top tier. They try to do too much, and because of it, they don't do enough, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, good film, but not great. And really, it's just the story. Everything else was perfect. And so, with all that being said, that's the end of the video, and would like to say that these are just my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the film if you've seen it? Did you like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.